Good evening, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 125. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile, to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and wild. Your new God's sullen peoples have devil and have child. Take up the white man's burden in patience to abide, to veil the threats of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit and work another's gain. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. Fill full the mouth of famine and bid the sickness cease. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought, what's love that Eden fought? Bring all your hopes to naught. Take up the white man's burden, not tawdry rule of kings, but toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. The ports she shall not enter, the roads she shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of foes ye better, the haste of foes ye guard. The cry of foes ye humor, a slowly toss the night. Why brought she us from bondage, a loved Egyptian guys? Take up the white man's burden, ye dare not stoop to less, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your weariness. By all ye cry or whisper, by all ye leave or do, the silent, silent people shall wail gods and you. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days, the lightly proffered laurel, the easy young grudge praise. Comes out to search your manhood through all Rise with Geopolitics, the judgment of your peers. Take off the white man's burden through all the fantasies.
Okay, that was, of course, the excellent Chris Gard. Please go and check out his channel if you would like to hear some excellent music. How are you going, Mitch, this week?
Same old, same old.
Can you hear me, Mitch?
Can't
Hello?
you hear me? Can't you hear me?
I think maybe Mitch has gone away from his computer for a minute. All right, this week, one of the topics we're going to talk about this week in due course is the difficulty, especially for young people, of getting onto the housing ladder in Britain and Australia, but I mean, it's true of most of the Anglo-Sphere countries and indeed most Western countries as well. Mitch, are you back yet, mate?
Can you hear me?
Bum, bum, bum.
Can't you hear me? I can't. I'm in chat saying they can hear me, but for some reason you can't.
Well, I don't know what's going on there, but we will see.
This is bloody weird. But I got no problems.
Mitch, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Can you hear the sound can the audience hear the sound, chat? Can you let me know, please? I'm unmuted, Mitch, so I don't know why I can't hear you. You're not muted either. So I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, I can't hear you at all, Mitch. I'm sorry. I don't know why. Do you want to leave the stream and come back? Maybe that will fix it. All right. Sorry about this, people. Technical difficulties, and I am not exactly a tech whiz. Let me tell you, too old for that stuff. I will just put up with anyone. Okay, let's see if this works this time. And now, there you are.
Can you hear me?
Yep, now it's perfect, mate. Can you hear me?
I can hear you all right.
Yeah, good. How are you going, mate?
Same old, same old.
Something told me you were going to say that. Did you have? We're going to be joined by AI in a bit, but he's a bit late because he's been delayed in traffic. Did you have a first topic you wanted to talk about, Mitch?
It's sort of the usual happenings in that certain Eastern European crap hole. Apparently, there's a university that's saying that Anglo-Saxons never existed. Like I saw it on like the Sargon's Twitter.
How do they work that out?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll link the tweet by because I found it off Sargon on Twitter. Hold on.
That's quite interesting. I just don't know how they can possibly claim that. I know a lot of the lefties at university consider Anglo-Saxon to be like some sort of racist thing. and they were trying to get the study of Anglo-Saxon banned, which is ridiculous when you think that somebody like Tolkien, for example, was a professor of Anglo-Saxon.
Yeah, and especially when you consider the fact that, I mean, what, the Anglo-Saxons make up, at least a quarter of the average Englishman's genome, or a half, depending on which area you come from.
Yep.
Like
Yep,
East Midlands,
absolutely.
for example. Yeah, it's like, for example, you get the western half of England, like Cornwall, Liverpool, which is solidly Celtic genetically, while the East Midlands and East Anglia are, I mean, they're more Germanic than half of Germany genetically.
Yeah.
Especially up, yeah. So, yeah, and it's not just that. I mean, our language has origins in northern Germany. A lot of our customs and traditions come back to the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, for example, there's a town in Staffordshire by the name of Abbots Bromley where we have a horn dance, which is an Anglo-Saxon fertility thing, like as in for fertility of the soil, so that if they do this sort of horn dance, like where antlers clash against one another, then the Anglo-Saxons thought, okay, the gods will bless us with a good harvest. So that's like one Anglo-Saxon tradition I can think of, top of my head. And so generally, I mean, you have the guy in my profile pic, no less, who often calls us Anglo-Saxons. There's that as well.
Nennius in the chat is asking, how are we more Germanic than Germany?
Oh, it said like there are parts of Germany like Bavarian, or like southern Germany are more Celtic genetically than Germanic, and the thing about eastern half of England is like chances are they're more genetically Germanic than southern Germans, like Bavarians and so on, and Austrians.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, because I mean, in the case of England, I mean, it's like a situation where the western half of England is we're pretty much just Celts who got assimilated, whereas the eastern half, especially up the coastal areas like Lincolnshire, East Anglia, perhaps Middlesex, but I'm not fully sure about that, would be more Anglo-Saxon because they reckon. Because I mean, I think it was I don't know what the name of a Scottish fellow of GB News is, but he did like a genetic study back in like 2006, and he found that like with East Anglia, it was like 80% Anglo-Saxon. So it was clear that in that area, the Celtic people that lived there, it wasn't that they got assimilated there, they just got wiped out in that area. Probably because back when the Anglo-Saxons conquered that place, the place was very swampy. It's just ideal terrain for guerrilla warfare. You can just imagine the Anglo-Saxons, they would have just got angry enough, they would have just done either chucked them all out or just wiped them all out through bloodshed.
Yeah, and also I think there was a bit of interbreeding going on as well, no doubt.
Yeah, especially in like West Midlands, southwest of England, especially, yeah. Where, I mean, to be fair, I mean, as I said earlier, the average Englishman these days is at least 25% to 50% Anglo-Saxon. So it's a case of, Anglo-Saxon men mainly, but they would have brought over their women, although there's debate about that because the ships they used, they weren't as advanced as the Viking longships, which could take on a lot more people and also brave stormy seas, such as what the Atlantic were offering.
Yeah, this was when the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes as well were arriving in England. This is what's called the Migration era, so it's actually a bit earlier than the Viking period. Yes.
Yeah, the Vikings were 800 AD when they started, but I mean, you got the Great Heathen Army, which started around 867 AD. But like where the Anglo-Saxons, they started conquering as soon as the Romans left. Because I mean, if you believe the tales of Hengist, Horsa, and Vortigern, you'd think it was like 454 AD was when Kent was established as an Anglo-Saxon kingdom, because the Celtic king Vortigern, he hired the Anglo-Saxons as mercenaries to fight against the Picts and the Scottish raiders from Ulster. He hires them as mercenaries, However, they're able to use Vortigern's lust for Horsa's daughter against him, and so they entice him to give more and more land over time, to the point where half a bloody country is practically just Anglo-Saxon territory.
Yeah, yeah, I can believe that. NIMBYism makes a good point in the chat. He's saying that the Celts maybe didn't even want the land. I heard once that the Anglo-Saxons were the only ones prepared to manage swampland, and that the Romano-Celts didn't want it. And of course, also a lot of the Romano-British had actually buggered off to Brittany, for example. That's why Brittany in France is called Brittany, is because so many Romano-British moved there after Rome abandoned Britain.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of swampland, I mean, the Anglo tribe, they come from an area of Germany called Schleswig-Holstein, which we reckon that the Angles, so many of them left their original homeland, that the area they came from was actually depopulated, because the thing was, it suffered a lot from North Sea floods, and so they all just upped sticks and moved over to Eastern England to get like a better chance of, you know, having land that doesn't get flooded on a regular basis. So they reckon that, yeah, I won't be surprised if they actually took over East Anglia eagerly, because they thought, even if it's swampland, because they just thought, okay, well, this is a good base to work with. Let's conquer more land. So then that we have more land to farm, more land for our people, etc., etc.
That makes sense. As No Name is saying in the chat, there's also quite a lot of Danish DNA in Britain, of course, because the Vikings, the Norse, were mostly from Denmark, the guys who came to England.
Yeah, it's generally the Dane, because I mean there's a reason why it's called the Danelaw, whereas the Norwegians spent their time with Scotland and Ireland, and the Swedish spent their time. And the Swedish, they largely kept to the Baltic, right? Especially Russia, when you have Rurik and his dynasty that sets up what we call today the Kievan Rus, who came, because I mean the word Rus comes from an area of Sweden called Roslagen, which is like area where the men row. Pretty much. I think that's
that makes sense. I do know that the Norwegians, like the Norwegians, were in the Orkneys and the Shetlands, for example.
Yeah.
And as you say, the guys who were in the north of England, sort of the area which is now around Newcastle, Sunderland, that sort of area, those, and York, obviously, were mostly Danes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was like the only like, I mean, they reckon that the Danish part of DNA has been like, I don't know what the proper word is, like scaled down a bit, because you had St. Bryce's Day massacre, which, I mean, from what I read of it, well, it was only the border areas. It wasn't really big areas like York. But then you had the harrying of the North under William the Conqueror, where the North was just burnt to a crisp. So they reckon that a lot of the Danish DNA, there was 1,000 years ago, especially under Canute the Great and whatnot, a lot of it just got wiped by William the Conqueror, practically just like burning the North to crisp. Diluted, that was it.
Yep. Lee Ham in the chat is saying, don't forget the Outer Hebrides and Ireland, which of course were also big Norse Viking places. I mean, Dublin started life as a Viking slave port, basically.
Yeah. I think it's like, I don't know if it's Orkneys or Shetlands, where I think like the only part of the UK where it's mandatory to learn Norwegian, because the thing is, it's like the people there are like half Norwegian, half Scottish, I believe. When you get the people of Iceland, then you get Iceland, who, like the people of Iceland, from what I see, it's essentially Vikings, Anglo-Saxons, and Irish, as well as Scottish, all mixed into one country genetically.
Yeah. Well, Britain's certainly got a nice warlike mix of races. I mean, you know, the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, and also the Norse were all pretty warlike people. So
yeah, the Anglo-Saxons, I mean, Vikings, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's a reason why, for example, the Anglo-Saxons were the only people in Europe at that time of Alfred the Great to actually chuck back the Vikings at a time when, you know, the French struggled with them, the Germans struggled, the Dutch struggled, the Irish and the Scottish struggled too, and the Russians. Well, the only reason the Russians had a break from the Vikings was because they assimilated the Viking elite.
Okay, fair enough. No Name in the chat is saying the East Riding of Yorkshire is basically still Danelaw, Anglo-Danish Northumbrian descendants. I mean, look, this is not my area of expertise, so I'm perfectly prepared to believe you, No Name. But what do you say, Mitch?
Yeah, I've heard. I think it's I don't know if it's Geordie where their word for child is bairn because that comes from a Norwegian word barn, which also means child. So it's a case where, for example, where I come from, the dialect is very Anglo-Saxon. Like, for example, instead of saying "How are you," we say "How bist," because "bist" was the old way of saying it before we got the word "are" from the Norse. So there's that. Whereas northeastern England, especially, is more Viking. So, especially when you factor in, there's lots of places like Scunthorpe or Naseby, or places with B and Thorpe in the name. They're always
there's lots
by
of
Vikings.
there's lots of Norse names in the north of England for sure.
Yeah, I mean you get when any place then with Bury in it is all or like I don't know, let's say Birmingham, which the thing about the word Birmingham is it comes from an old Anglo-Saxon tribe of Beormingas, which means son of Beorn. So that's one. I mean, any place then with ham in it is like comes from the old word Hamlet, which I think Hamlet means like a village without a church or something like that. Like back when we were still pagans, we found villages where there was no temple because, like, it's quite interesting now the Germanic pagans that conquered the place, whether they be Anglo-Saxons and Norse, they didn't really build temples all over the place like how the Christians did. So
Yeah,
that's
that
why.
makes sense.
Yeah, that's why. Like, you get the word.
Sorry, we didn't catch what you said there, mate. Your sound's not very good, man.
Oh, how about now? Is that a bit better?
Much better. Yeah, much better. Sorry. Good evening, by the way, AI. Sorry to hear about your traffic difficulties.
No worries. Ironically, it was caused to putting up pride flags. Is what stopped me from getting here at the appointed time.
How typical. How typical of the modern world.
And then
Because of course
modernity.
It's the holy month, isn't it? This month it's the holy month of LGBTQ stuff.
It was so toxic. I was like staggered through the front door, went into the office and logged on here as soon as possible to regenerate my based levels, based and racist and homophobic levels back to the healthy amount. So
we've just been talking about we've just been talking about the DNA in UK. Obviously the Anglo-Saxons, the Celts, and also to some degree the Danes, the Norse. So we have been on fairly based subjects.
Oh no, that's pretty good. There was I think it might have been Oxford or not Oxford University, but professors of like demographics at Oxford who because I remember Survivor Jive, the content creator.
Yeah, he's excellent. Yeah, I really recommend his channel to people.
He's excellent. Yeah, and he comes from my old neck of the woods as well, so that's another added thing. And what's interesting was that he reviewed this paper where through burial, because one of the questions that many people have asked, and this is like the Anglo-Saxon invasions, is like what happened with the native Romano-British population that existed beforehand, and why was it that in other scenarios where, and this plays into English exceptionalism, by the way, I think one could argue from one point of view, when the Franks took over large parts of Gaul, or the Visigoths in Spain, they sort of developed within that dominant culture, and they became largely, well, they either adopted Latin Christianity, their languages were influenced, and you don't see like the emigrating population didn't really have much cultural sway than
Yeah,
when
they
you
were
compare to
assimilated. They were assimilated into the locals. Yeah.
Oh yeah, pretty much. Yeah, across the board. But with the Anglo-Saxons, that never happened. The development of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and I know the historical thing is you have 7 kingdoms, and that was true to a certain point in time. But you have to remember, it's more likely that you had lots of petty kingdoms. We don't really know the full number, but there is you know it may have been the size of um uh several sort of 20 square miles or something, but for whatever the case, in this DNA paper, it shows that 75% of the native Romano British population in what is Roman Britain, the borders of Roman Britain, was excluding Wales and Cornwall, but they were ethnically replaced. And they can determine that through DNA, but also burials. So you see at the early start, you see bodies from the start of the Anglo-Saxon migrations, many Christian-style burials where you could identify those as being native Roman Brits with like the not just like the clothing, but also the style and items buried with them. And then you can determine the Anglo-Saxons, Germanic peoples who are buried. They usually be buried with iconography or objects relating to their pantheon, and you see that become more dominant over time. And so the argument is that there was a full-on demographic replacement which was not seen in any other parts of, well, one could argue northern Italy with the Lombards because of depopulation due to the war and the Justinian plague, and I think you have a strong argument. But even then, there is still, there is still a dominance of a Latinized people. I mean, yeah, and of course, Cornwall and Wales were kind of the last holdouts, and also Cumbria as well. I mean, it did say, the demographic report did say there were like odd patches around England where you had like Celtic holdouts for some time, but over time, the native Brits who remained, who survived all that, would assimilate into Anglo-Saxon society.
Yeah, I've watched videos that say that the modern Brits still have a reasonable amount of DNA from like the early guys, the Bell Beaker people and so on.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things is that, and I've seen this. I'm trying to find this article. If I find it, I'll link it in the private chat, and because it is actually quite interesting one to find. It does say that the modern Brit, they'll say like a high figure of 40%, like French, like Northern French, Norse, and the thing there is they define it by modern day boundaries of national boundaries, but you have to remember the Saxons and the Franks originated in the similar region in what's now, Frisia, northern Germany, Belgium, and such. And so, while you think, okay, that's a lot of French, it actually may be it may not be what you think it is, and that's not like a French person, say from Aquitaine or some Mediterranean. It's nothing radical like that. So there is a bit, but overall, yeah, modern English people are still largely, I mean, overwhelmingly descendants of their Anglo-Saxon ancestors.
Yeah. I just would like to point out that Patriotic Archive is in the chat, and I've got a tune of his that we'll play at the end of the stream from his channel. Go and check it out. But also, Patriotic Archive actually picked the thumbnail for this evening's stream, and I really liked it because the little dog in it is absolutely a spit of my little dog. So I thought, yeah, definitely going to use that. And I would also like to thank. I've got to try and pronounce her name, Josephina Herringway, for an extremely generous $50 donation, which she has said is biscuits for Rudy, my dog. And if he gets that number of biscuits, he's going to get very fat. But he will certainly get some.
Yeah.
So thank you very much to Josephina.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's quite, because I mean, you take the case of, like, for example, England, where before the Anglo-Saxons came along, there was like a Romano-British sort of setup where you still had Roman baths, which were still operating, although Roman Britain didn't live up to the same glory after the fall of the empire as it did during the empire. So the lifestyle still changed. Then the Anglo-Saxons came along, and it was generally a situation where the Anglo-Saxons, of course, were militarily powerful. There was far more of them, especially they reckon also that Justinian's plague, because the Romano Britons would have traded with the Byzantines, they probably would have also caught the plague, whereas the Anglo-Saxons, they wouldn't have caught it so much as badly, because they didn't trade as much with the Byzantines.
A person who used to be online, Owain, we had this theory, and it was if you read I don't know if any of you guys remember Owain at all. Foundation's channel.
I remember him.
Yeah, we had this theory because if you read, and what Mitch just said was actually a very good point, because the Romano Brits, the thing was that there's too much emphasis on the legions left and Britain collapsed, and that's just I think there's too much importance put on the legions leaving Britain. What was it, in 410? Was it like 410 or something like that?
Around about then.
Yeah. I mean, because for example, there were several occasions beforehand where legions would leave, like Constantine left Britain and to capture to march on Italy
it happened quite often in Roman civil wars because the UK had free legions. Britain had free legions, which made it a relatively powerful part of the Roman Empire.
It did, and I mean, one of our theories that we developed, me and Owen, was if you read the accounts of the missionaries who returned to Anglo-Saxon Britain, like the first kingdom they went to was Kent, because a Frankish princess, I think it was Bertha, was marrying the king of Kent, and in that ceremony that he would convert, and the people of Kent would convert to Christianity and all that.
There's a painting of that, isn't there? There's a painting of that, I'm sure.
Yeah, and in when the I think it was it Augustine of Canterbury, when him and his missionaries arrived, they went out to investigate because they then went to Essex, and the missionary work went to London, and as soon as they got there, that London was abandoned. They even say that the sewer system had completely collapsed. The streets of London were covered, and it was completely abandoned. And so one of the theories we had was that the Saxons in that period of conquest and migration, they seized the rural parts of England and the cities where you had I guess, like you could say, maybe even holdouts or Romano-British remnants suffered from war, plague, because again, Justinian plague largely most plagues, they affect urban centers, and that's probably why you had a situation where I mean, I'm not sure about York. I haven't looked into. I don't know if York was abandoned during that period. I don't think that it was ever abandoned, to be honest. But London was abandoned. And I think also
I've definitely
Colchester and
read about that. That London was basically a ghost town for quite a long time.
Yeah, because the monks, they went to the site of I guess St. Paul's or what would become St. Paul's because there was a Christian church there, even though it was again derelict and run down, and built, you know, the first St. Paul's. So the story goes. So I mean, yeah, there does seem to be that. I think there is. I think Justinian plague probably did contribute largely to the depopulation of England, like it happened in Italy.
Well,
Someone
just
said
before
earlier,
you came on, AI, we
yeah,
were saying that a lot of the Romano Britons left Britain after the legions departed and went to Brittany, and that is why Brittany in France is called Brittany, because of all the Romano Britons who moved there.
yes, I mean, yeah, probably many of them. There was always the tale that they would move westwards to Cornwall and then Brittany, and maybe even crossed over back into Gaul and such. So I mean, yes, it is totally possible. And
I think also during the Roman Empire, the Celts originally were a very warlike people. I mean, you know, that they fought Julius Caesar when he invaded twice, and it took the Romans almost 100 years to actually conquer most of England.
And also remember,
but during the Roman Empire, they kind of lost that warlikeness because they didn't need it anymore because the legions were there. Although there were, of course, British auxiliaries in the Roman forces.
Yeah, I mean, I think what was different was in Rome you had, in the Roman Empire, you had men, you had and I think a lot of people who perpetuate the sort of Dark Age and certain myths about that period is that it wasn't that the quality of men was sort of denigrated and they were weaker, because even in late Roman Empire that they were still winning battles. Even the Western, they would win, so they would win battles against the Huns and such. So that wasn't the problem. As you said, the problem was that when you have an entire population or entire tribal culture, say in Ireland, who are warlike, and then you have in Roman Britain where only a fraction of the population have any military training or have had any military training, then you know, of course there's going to be you know, they're not going to survive. Same with the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, like the Vikings, most of those warriors were just, you know, farmers. They would be asked by their local, you know, jarl or whatever to take up arms, and they'd go off and fight, and that was it.
Only in the Dark Ages, only the very top layer of warriors were in any way, shape, or form professionals. You know what the Norse and eventually the Anglo-Saxons called the housecarls. Those guys were kind of professional warriors, but the vast majority of people, as you say, were really basically farmers who could be called up in emergency.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, also remember in this sort of time, the start of the Anglo-Saxon invasions, St. Patrick was captured because he was a Romano Brit himself. His father was a bishop, but also a regional governor in Roman Britain.
Oh, interesting! I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's well, this is from his own accounts. There is like a Patrick's accounts of his like life and everything, and he's captured by Irish raiders, enslaved. He's taken to Ireland where he is, and the thing is, he emphasised that he's not much of a believer in his in in his early life, and then I think he's as a slave he was a shepherd. His job was to shepherd sheep, tend to the flocks and everything. And while he was out in a cave sleeping or something, he had his visions from God, and everything went on from there. Yes, it's apostle to the Irish. That's right. And of course, he would know to convert the over time, establish what was it, the Irish church, and develop into Celtic Christianity, and you know, from there it spread into Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and Anglo-Saxon England, mainly Northern England in particular.
I know that I think it's Adam in the chat has been pointing out that there were remnants of the Romano-British Christian church still in the north of England when the Anglo-Saxons were arriving in the south of England.
Yes. So what was Adam? There would have been small groups of Romano Brits, Christians that actually might converted a few Anglo-Saxons. Is that the one?
Yeah, there was that, but he was also pointing out earlier on, like further
right.
up in the chat, that when the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes were arriving in the south of Britain, in the north of England, there were still like pockets of the Roman Church, which I'm sure is true.
Oh yeah, I mean,
I think
okay,
you said I think it was you, AI, who said that Cumbria, for example, was still fairly Christian.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting thing. Where I live, there was recently, when I say recently, it was about back in 2017, a Roman villa was discovered not too far from where I lived, and it was discovered in a site where it was an Anglo-Saxon settlement, and it was referenced in the Domesday Book, and it's also the site of an old monastery, so it has several layers of history attached to it, and it's a villa. And what's interesting, this Roman villa dates back to the what they think is like the 3rd, 4th century, and you know, they found a mix of not just pagan but also like regional pagan but also Christian iconography. I mean, one of the Christians is the Cairo that was found, which is not surprising. I know that some argued maybe that was just the family, you know, as a form of allegiance to the emperor of the days, which would have been their, you know, the symbol used. But yeah, I mean, there was, I think in Northern England in particular, there was a very strong holdout. Probably not surprising, because if you think about it, the Angles, the Jutes, the Saxons, those tribes probably arrive. I mean, was it Hengist and Horse? They say that they would arrive in the southeast, Norfolk coast, Lincolnshire, places like that. So, yeah, maybe even sailed up the Thames.
Yeah, Mitch was talking about Hengist and Horsa just before you joined us, AI. So, Mitch, what do you reckon about that one, mate?
Yeah, I know. The Cumbrian language, I reckon, like, because apparently that was one of the last holdouts of the old Brythonic languages that died out under Anglo-Saxon assimilation. So, and you can imagine Cumbria being close to Ireland in terms of the Irish Sea coastline. You can imagine that was a big holdout against Anglo-Saxon assimilation for quite a long while. As for Hengist and Horse, I mean, originally they were promised to Isle of Thanet near Essex, I believe, if I remember correct. So they were promised that island. Yeah, so this like small, like, because they reckon there was only like 10 ships of Anglo-Saxons who set up shop in England at that time. But then, through just manipulation of Vortigern, as well as Vortigern's own weakness, because he mishandled the Romano-British armies, the Anglo-Saxons were able to just scoop up more land to the point where half the southeast, at least in terms of, let's say, Kent, Essex, and Middlesex, ended up becoming dominated just by the Jutish tribe. And then you can imagine, you can imagine if that story is how to be held true. You can also imagine the other tribes, like the Angles and the Saxons, as well as the Frisians and southern Scandinavians who took part, would have looked upon such success and go, okay, England is, Britannia is rich pickings to us. We can just scoop up loads of farmland. as well as like just get rich, because of course Britannia at that time was known to be quite fertile land compared
Yes.
to especially Scandinavia, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the reasons that caused the Norse to go Viking, and of course the Vikings were not a people. You went Viking, which is to say raiding. And one of the reasons they did that is because their land was so bloody poor. Or much of their land was very poor. That's one of the reasons they went Viking. So, yeah.
Yeah.
No Name also in the chat is saying that there's a massive Saxon runestone in Staining Church, which I can believe because, of course, Christian churches were often placed on old pagan religious sites.
Yeah, because in the case of Christianity, I mean, like for example, yeah, you take the story of Father Christmas, where you have Father Christmas and the reindeer. That's just like a Christian form of the old Germanic myth of Odin and his. I don't know what his steeds were that drove his chariot. I don't know if they were horses or something like that. I can't remember. I'm pretty sure they were reindeer, though. Hence why Father Christmas has reindeer as his steeds for his sleigh. So it's like so. In the case of Christianity converting the Anglo-Saxons, it was that played upon old customs and just reorientated them to suit a Christian lens.
For sure,
essentially.
for sure. I mean, there's no evidence that Jesus was born in the middle of December, for example. That was just taking over an old pagan Roman festival, basically.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, because in Northern Europe, especially among the Germanic tribes, like the Anglo-Saxons and so on, we would generally have big dinners in the winter because the summer we would spend our time, feeding the animals and sowing crops. I mean, autumn time we spend our time, slaughtering the animals to produce meat and store it, or reap what we've sown. So then, winter time, yeah, you're able to. You haven't really got much to do because it's snowy, so you just eat contentedly. Like you have a lot of food on the plate.
Yeah. It's a good way to break. It's a good way to break up the middle of the winter and make it a bit more cheerful.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wiggles in the chat. Watch it, mate, because real Brummies like Mitch are not descended from Roman African slaves at all. So there you go. Josephina points out the Yule log. Yeah, absolutely, and Saturnalia, which I think is the Roman festival that Christmas kind of took over.
Yeah, and then you got it's more of a Celtic tradition, it's not an Anglo-Saxon one, but you got Halloween, which takes up place at the same time as Samhain, I think it's pronounced, which is like an Irish pagan festival, which is about like the dead. So that's also like why Halloween or Saint Hallow's Eve. I can't remember the name of saint around that time, but yeah, that's.
Yeah, Halloween, when I was a kid, look, I'm an old bugger, I'm 58, but like when I was a kid in the 70s, Halloween was not a big deal in the UK.
Yeah, it's a very American thing from what I see of it, because it's
and I think it came from Ireland mostly, didn't it? I think to America.
I can't remember if it was either Irish or German. I can't remember.
Adam in the chat is also saying there's no evidence that the Christians co-opted Saturnalia. Inspiring philosophy has dealt with this at length. Look, all I would say, Adam, and I'm not an expert on this at all I would say is there's certainly a debate about it. And I think Alice Liddell has probably got the right of it. It was about hang on, I'll put up the wrong chat. There you go. The cult of the invincible sun worship solstice on the 25th of December, and I think that's probably where it came from. But anyway, that's just me, and I'm no expert on religious matters whatsoever. So I beg your pardon, AI. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say on that point. I think it was the 25th of December. I think it's more referencing the Sol Invictus cult, that was set up by I think it was Emperor Aurelian. I think it's
Yes.
Emperor Aurelian. Yeah.
Yeah, they even
and
convert. There was a giant statue next to the Colosseum in Rome, which was originally of Nero, but the Romans, after Nero was deposed and then killed himself, they converted it into a Sol Invictus statue, I believe, or something like that. Anyway.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the problems with the Roman Empire, even by the time of the crisis of the third century, was that due to the numerous groups of people and the ever expanding pantheon of gods, you had this situation where the Roman gods were, because during that period of expansion, Roman gods weren't really that they weren't really adopted. You had that what they call syncretism, or where you had the blending
Syncretism.
of various gods. Yeah, that's right. You had the blaring of uh, the several gods, and so you had this you had this situation where like I can't I think it was a Christian. I mean, okay, this comes from a Christian in like the sort of third century. So I mean, I know this is not going to be taken with a pinch of salt, but I mean, they talked about the what was it, the goddess Isis being paraded through the streets of Rome, and it's like, what relevance does this have to the population of Rome? So I guess it was a way of
But it did.
creating a singular
ISIS became quite popular in Rome, I believe.
with women, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But I think the problem was there was this especially within elements of the Roman elite, they thought to themselves, hang on a sec, we need to have like some sort of common civilizational, common spiritual connection. Because you think about like the Parthians that would become the Sassanids. I mean, it was just Zoroastrianism. I mean, I know there was different branches and there's sects within, but at the end of the day, you
This is
could
for
determine.
people in the chat. With AI is talking about what used to be Persia, pretty much. So yeah, sorry, mate.
Yeah, Persia, Parthia, yeah, that's right, Persia, and Azerbaijan as well. So I think there was an element, and of course, the Sol Invictus cult worked for a time, but then, as you know, Christianity filled the boots because
But I mean,
I think on
it was a normal Roman thing to
yeah.
adopt the local gods, and over time to assimilate them into their own pantheon of gods. Yeah.
Yeah, I also go as far to say that the reason why Christianity was or became the official Roman religion by the time of Theodosius after Constantine was that I think if you look at the Roman elite after Constantine, it became, I mean, it ceased to be Latin and it became Greek. It became ethnically Greek. It was run and controlled by Greeks. Um, I think the most obvious of that would be the creation of Constantinople and the political and cultural drive eastwards, where many of those in the military and future emperors would come from, what's now the Roman Balkans. So
Michael K, 19th century fan in the chat, has said there were lots of cults going around Rome: Isis, Sol Invictus, Mithridates, etc. Mithras, for example, was enormously popular for quite a long time in Rome, and particularly with soldiers. But that was the downfall of it in the long run, because women couldn't become involved in that, and nor could slaves, and nor could anyone else other than soldiers. But it was actually the main cult of the Roman army for quite a long time.
Yeah, it was a huge cult. I mean, they even had I don't know if they call them temples, but
yeah, they've found quite a few temples of Mithras all over the Roman Empire, including in Britain.
Yeah, yeah. There's one in Edinburgh, what's now Edinburgh region, apparently, or some, and then there's one in London below the stock exchange. If you didn't know.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So, yeah.
definitely. But this was a Roman characteristic, and it was one of the reasons that made them so successful. Instead of getting rid of the gods of people that they conquered, they accepted them, and over time they tended to assimilate them into the Roman pantheon. So you will find like old Celtic British gods. If you go to places like Bath and you look at the museums around there where they've got lots of stuff that has been thrown in as devotional objects and all this kind of stuff, you will find there are lots of gods and goddesses who had both a British Celtic and a Roman character mixed together.
Yeah, Silas Aqua, I think, is the one in Bath. It was the temple Silas, or Silas being the Celtic goddess for the springs, and then Aqua being the Roman equivalent. And there's that's right, because the official the temple entrance had in Latin Silas Aqua, if I remember correctly, in Bath. So yeah,
Bath is beautiful, Judge Bushman. Yes, it is. I like Bath. I like the Regency terraces and also the Roman baths and the museum. They're all very, very interesting. And also there's a lovely abbey as well. Is it an abbey?
Yeah, it's an abbey. No, it's a wonderful city. You go to the Guildhall as well. And also, I think you can go to William Herschel's house as well. I've been there several times in Bath.
The astronomer type dude, yeah.
Yeah, the astronomer. I think, was he also a composer as well? Yeah. So
yes, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. The funny thing is with Bath, a lot during the I guess the start of the House of Hanover's rule, you had a lot of Germans who moved to Bath. Not sure particularly why, but a lot of Germans moved to Bath.
Well, they certainly provided some good music, people like Handel, etc.
Yes, it's just a shame that it's full of homeless and shit and gay Americans.
Is it now? I haven't been to Bath in 30 odd years. So is it? I didn't know that.
Last time I went up there, which was about 6-7 months ago, I doubt it's improved since, but when I went up there, the entire city centre, the old city centre, every shop entrance, it was filled with homeless and shits and needles, and it was horrible.
Oh, that's a shame. Well, it is quite close to Bristol, sadly. But
yeah.
But yeah, no, that is a shame. When I went last time, I was in Bath. Like I say, it was well over 30 years ago, and it wasn't like that at all. Yeah. So you used to have good bookshops, good secondhand bookshops, and all the stuff of a cultured town. So.
Yeah, Mitch mentioned Pulteney Bridge. Yeah, that's fantastic. It's you got shops, cafes on there, and yes, it's my grandmother used to take me to one. There was a cafe on there that you used to get cream cakes and everything. It was wonderful.
Mitch, I'm not sure if this is right, but I was told that bridge is almost like a copy of that one in Venice. Is that right? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bridge in Florence as well, which in terms of how many, because it has a similar design in terms of having loads of shops along it. So I won't be surprised with Bath, because Bath was a lot of the architecture was Georgian era, and of course at that time the Renaissance had passed, but we still have that fondness for Italy in terms of architecture. So I won't be surprised if
and people were doing the Grand Tour, of course, like the wealthy were doing the Grand Tour, so that was something people did back then.
Yeah, I won't be surprised, as I said, if Pulteney Bridge ends up actually just being sort of Anglo version of the Rialto or that bridge in Firenze. I don't know what's really called in Florence, but I'll look it up.
Cool. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I heard it was a copy, but I mean, architecture is not my area of expertise, just like religion. So I'm not going to comment on it too much. But Bath is a lovely town, or at least it used to be. If AI is right, obviously it's going downhill like so many other places these days.
One thing I would say is I remember one thing that was surprising was in the 2011 census. I remember when it came out. Bath was like, I think it was one of the most white English cities in England, but also I think the Christian population was way over 70% back then, which was much higher than the national average. So yeah, it's odd, and also it's a very big. I mean, politically on the ground, most people then and now, many back then were Liberal Democrats supporters. Today it's a bit of a mix of Liberal Democrat and Green. So yeah,
neither of whom are good in my humble opinion, but there we go.
One thing that's really funny, and I don't want to sound like some sort of Ben Shapiro dickhead commentator on this, but it's going to come out that way. So just prepare yourselves, everyone. In some weird way, they are because they understand when it comes to where these people live, the people in what we say the managerial, the people who run the system, who manage the system and run the system in this country. Bath and the surrounding areas is actually a place where they live, right? It's where a lot of these like journo types live. You'd be surprised a lot of Guardian Easters live there as well. And they, for some reason, they know they internalize where they live in group preference, and they know not to have blacks and browns living amongst them in Bath. Does that make sense, Iron Duke?
Yeah,
So
it does. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the NIMBY thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it basically comes back to actually they are kind of like racist in that sense, but at the same time they've just internalized for themselves and their families and everything their own in-group preference. So
Yeah, I mean the what's it called when you show what you really think rather than what you say.
Revealed preference.
But yeah, reveal preference amongst a lot of these lefties is very revealing, I would say.
Yeah, I mean they'll be happy to turn maybe like Swindon, which is just on the motorway up north from Bath, into some multicultural ethnic
Hell.
shithole, but
Yeah,
they won't
multicultural hell is what I always call. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Alphabet Cat says racist liberals. It comes down to that, but at the same time, I don't want to be saying that because the people who bang that drum are like Daily Wire people.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Liberals are the real racists. That's not something we should be supporting on the right, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't want to be saying that, but at the same time, I think actually saying that they internalize their own in-group preference, but at the same time it's for themselves. It's not for a wider purpose. Yeah, I mean that's how
that makes sense. What do you think, Mitch, about what we've just been talking about? You come from an extremely multicultural city, which is been like London, where I was born, has basically been destroyed as an English city.
Yeah, I mean, the architecture also isn't great either. Because I mean, for example, in my town, the architecture would remind you of those Soviet apartment buildings. Put it that way. They look like that. I can remember one time going to because I was visiting Jorvik one time, but this was bloody years ago with my uncle, and because you got Coppergate Market, which even back in the Anglo-Saxon and Viking times was a big market, perhaps the biggest in England at the time. And of course, in that area, you have a lot of Abbasid Persian coins because the thing is, Jorvik was tied to all of the Viking markets, including Mikhail and Rus, which
and those guys went everywhere. They went everywhere, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so naturally, along so you get through the Volga River, through Scandinavia into Jorvik. You have these like sort of Middle Eastern coins from Persia, from the Abbasid Caliphate, I believe. And of course, the usual suspects tried to argue that this was proof that England has always been multicultural because we've got coins from the Middle East.
Yeah, when in reality we get more immigration these days in a year than in the previous 2000, basically.
Yeah, it's like the Anglo-Saxons. I mean, what? How many of them came over and replaced the pretty much replace the original language? They still pale in comparison to how much immigration we receive year by year.
Yep. I was watching something yesterday, Mitch, where the guy actually pointed out that the immigration that Britain gets in a year now, the legal immigration, by the way, nothing to do with dinghies and all this, but the legal immigration that Britain gets in a year now is more than we got in the previous 2,000 years, basically.
Yeah, I mean, we've had invasions that had far less people involved, far fewer people, I should say, involved than what
William the
we
Bastard, for an example, in 1066, he didn't have that many soldiers, you know.
Yeah, it's like,
Well,
I mean,
was it like 45,000 or something like that? Normans.
Yeah, it wasn't many at all.
45,000 Normans.
Yeah.
And they weren't all Normans, they were Dutch and Flemish and French and stuff. So,
yeah, of course, there were mercenaries and what have you, absolutely. But it was a drop in the bucket compared to the mass immigration that UK gets these days.
Yeah.
It's really insane. As Judge Caligula Bushman says in the chat, it's just insane the amount of immigration UK is getting at the moment.
I mean, I've been seeing articles today, or this week, like one of which was again peak Americanization, where Britain has always been a nation of immigrants, and then there's another article saying actually, university presses now don't want to. We're no longer using the term Anglo-Saxon. The Anglo-Saxons never existed.
Yeah, we were talking about this just before you came on, AI. So if you know some more about it, do tell us.
I mean, this is a long-running thing that Anglo-Saxon studies have been trying to remove and redefine the term, and the argument is, and it's always by the way, and this isn't me being racist or anti-Semitic, but it's always done every bloody time. It's always done by American people of color and who are protected by the Civil Rights Act, let's just say.
Yeah.
In the US, it's by those people. It's always by those people, largely because academia is dominated by America, because America is the dominating force in the West.
But these people are anti-whites, basically. They're
anti-white. Yeah, they are anti-white.
And to be clear, they include some left-wing white people.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Well. Well, I'm not going to go into that. So anyway,
I'm not saying all of them are AI. I'm just saying some of them are.
Well, maybe Jared Taylor might have a different opinion on the white stuff.
Yeah. I don't know. Jared Taylor is generally. I like Jared Taylor. I think he's generally quite sensible. So
yeah, but There was an article I remember. I was reading it several weeks ago. It's by this again. I think he was a Brit in America. Oh no, so he was a Brit in this country with other American students, and they were doing. It was on there like a history research papers, and one of those was this American girl asked, "What are you doing?" She's doing like some sort of like medieval studies from like Plantagenet period, and he says, "Oh, I'm doing like Anglo-Saxon society," and she, he said that, she looked at me and like this funny look, and in her mind, she's American, when they think Anglo-Saxon, they basically, because she said, "Oh, why are you looking at like WASP conspiracy theories?" And so from the American, you have to remember, from the American point of view, Anglo-Saxon is the evil people that ran America before, MLK and the civil rights movement and the coalition of the civil rights movement. So,
yeah, no, I don't disagree with anything you say there. Nothing.
That's why this was I think that the leading figure to remove the Anglo-Saxons as a term is this Canadian this brown woman. I can't remember her name now.
So she's not really Canadian then, but okay.
She's not. She's not. She's a globalized citizen. With an agenda that all globalized, rootless cosmopolitans have. And yeah, I mean, she works in this field, and her argument is, well, their contemporaries at the time didn't refer to themselves as Anglo-Saxons. One, I don't think that is true, because I believe that Bede refers to the Saxons, the Angles, and the Saxons quite regularly.
Lots of the Old English sources refer to Saxons, etc. Yeah, for sure.
But the term Anglo-Saxon, she argues, was from a Lombard monk, and it's okay. Well, why did the Lombard monk refer to them as Anglo-Saxons? Because he wanted to, when he was conveying the message, he wanted to differentiate between the Saxons of northern Germany, who at that time were pagan and had little to no contact and ties with the rest of the larger Christian world, and then you had the Anglo-Saxons in England who were Christian and played a part in the Christian world. That's why there was a differential, because otherwise, if you just put Saxon, some parts of Europe might have thought, oh, is you referring to the Saxons of Saxony or the Saxons of northern England or something?
Even the Byzantines, like after 1066 and William the Bastard's victory in 1066, a lot of the aristocracy of Anglo-Saxon England moved to Byzantium, and the Wangerian Guard of the Byzantine emperors actually became more English than Norse. Like the Wangerian Guard, which was originally mostly Norsemen, eventually became mostly Englishmen. And even the Byzantines referred to these people as Anglo-Saxons.
Yeah, I remember. Because I'll put. Oh, sorry.
Carry on.
No, it's okay.
Carry on. Mitch, what were you saying?
I was going to say, because I shared that meme about there were two emperor manuals who befriended two of our King Henrys, because the Eastern Roman Empire held England in such high regard for our contribution to the Varangian Guard, and especially I think there was like one battle where, because you recall the Battle of Bavoya, where a Pecheneg raiding party got devastated by 500 Anglo-Saxons wielding those Great Dane axes that just destroyed their wagonburgs that the Pechenegs were using to fortify themselves. And the Anglo-Saxons were instrumental to that victory by using their Great Dane axes to just tear apart.
These Dane axes, by the way, guys, for people in the chat, a Dane axe is a bloody great axe on a big long pole that you use two-handed. And what it's great at doing is killing horses, for example.
Yeah.
So
that's the story. I imagine there'll be how do you think they'll refer to Anglo-Saxons? And it's obviously that the name's going to be changed. What are they going to call them? Like Old English? I don't know. Maybe that
it won't be changed. It won't be changed by me. I've got to tell you, I'm going to still call them Anglo-Saxons. I mean,
Oh
Tolkien,
yeah, but
Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, was a professor of Anglo-Saxon.
well, no, I am told by many Tolkien scholars that Tolkien's work is it's just fantasy, bro. It's just fantasy. It doesn't matter. The significance of it doesn't matter. It's just a consumable good, like Star Wars or fucking Star Trek or
Yeah,
some other shit
it's
that comes
not
out of Hollywood.
it's not based on a deep understanding of history
No,
and
no.
British and German, British and Norse sources. It's not that at all.
No, we need to adapt it for modern audiences. As long it's a consumable good, as long as we can dress up as our favorite characters from the series and go to some shitty little Comic-Con every year and and woo and cheer on Prime while they promote the next some spin-off season of some bastardized version of Tolkien's work, yeah, that's fine. That's fine.
Well, none of us are going
That's
to do that. None of us are going to do that. I'm pretty convinced.
I have to say one thing you find on, I see this on Twitter all the time. I mean, I think the Lord of the Rings accounts. There are these accounts on there which are purely they are just cosmetic. I call them cosmetic accounts, and all they do is they'll signal, oh, we like this product, but they view it as a product. And even when you got and there was one that sort of outed himself on this, where he just said, oh, it's just a consumable good. And obviously he was an American, so go figure. Oh, this is just a consumable good. If you don't like it, you don't have to consume this product. And so in his mind, the American mind, this isn't a story which has deep-rooted heritage in a people, in European history.
To be
Or
fair, AI, to be fair,
under,
you can't just say an American mind. You have to say a lefty American mind, because I know plenty of good Americans who don't believe that at all.
well, yeah, I get what you mean, but I do think there is an element of consumerism, or what the American the those on the American right as well would say capitalism, where it does, that way of thinking,
All right.
does play in.
What I'm thinking of here, AI, is people like Dave the Distributist, for example, or Don
Oh
the
yeah,
Pleb,
yeah.
or people like Charlemagne, people like Semiagog, guys like that would not regard it in that way at all.
No, no, they wouldn't. But I do think there is more of a collective move in that area when you see a lot of these accounts. And I mean, yeah, I mean those people exist in this country as well. But I don't know. These cosmetic accounts, and they do these things with other, like Star Wars and everything. I mean, Star Wars is a bit different because it is like a consumable product at this point, so it does not.
I
It's not the
always
same.
avoid I was never a big Star Wars fan, and I always supported the Empire. So there we go.
Yeah.
The Empire Strikes
resonated
Back,
with the Empire.
Yeah, the Empire Strikes Back. So yeah, I was
fair
never
enough.
I was never a Star Wars fan. I gotta say, I used to like the original series of Star Trek, but only the original series with William Shatner, because that was kind of like a Western in space, I would say, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean,
with girls in miniskirts, which was always good. But I never liked Star Trek after the original series.
Well, you had the famous interracial kiss, which was hyped up, wasn't it? In Star Trek.
Yeah, big time.
Wasn't that?
Big
That was
time.
a thing,
I didn't really much care about that, to be quite honest with you. But
you saw the contents of their character.
yeah, kind of. I mean, I'll tell you, when I was younger, I did kind of believe in that stuff. but I certainly don't now, because it's, you know, the where they were trying to move to is now so obvious.
Yeah.
But I'm not. On the one hand, I don't like to condemn all of Americans. Like when I was in the SADF, in the South African Defence Force, there were a couple of American dudes who were also in that, who were really based in good blokes. So you can't tar everyone with the same brush. I mean, I detest and hate Rishi Sunak, who is not at all British, but he's the British Prime Minister. Does that mean I turn around and say all Britons are like Rishi Sunak? No, they're not. So all Americans are not like senile pedophile Biden, for example, you know?
I mean, I will say one that, as I mentioned there, one of the reasons I was late coming to the stream was because my local town, and it's a small town, it's a rural. I mean, I live in the Shires, hence my name, and even when the Shires are like openly displaying the worst aspect of the American Empire, and I do believe that the LGBT, what people would describe as woke, if you were to ask your average normally woke, the cultural power of the American Empire in that regard, in your small shire towns, I don't have much hope. I've lost complete. I'm so detached from even the local English population where I am.
All right.
I'm like I'm
I
completely
see what
detached.
you. I do totally see what you're saying.
And so I'm not trying to argue. Oh, look at me. At least us Brits are better, or us English people are better than you silly Americans. I'm not. That's not my point. It's just I'm. I mean, I've lost hope on everybody, every group now.
Yeah.
I've lost all hope.
But
Flee, abandon, yes, flee for your
I
lives.
totally agree with you, AI. But all I'm trying to say is that the Biden government, for example, just like the Sunak government in the UK, just like the Labour government in Australia, are anti their own people, and they're certainly very, very anti straight white men.
I mean, this is the end stage of liberal democracy. This is liberal democracy in action.
What's your opinion, Mitch?
On one hand, I'd say, like, in the case of liberalism, I mean, it was like the British who originally came up with it. But then there's also the argument of, okay, well, there's some aspects of liberalism in the UK where it's not organically made by us. It's a case of the Americans exporting it to us. For example, you take Lord of the Rings now being just reduced to some consumerist product where Redditors can like just glee together like the insufferable twats they are. That's not really an English thing as so much as it's an American thing to just look upon everything in a sort of consumerist lens. That's because we created liberalism, so in a way I would say a lot of our problems are self-inflicted, but there's some aspects of liberalism today that I just think, it's not organically made by us. It's a case of America exporting it to everyone as well, such as reducing everything, even something as sacred as Lord of the Rings, to just consumable product where Redditors can just circle jerk.
Hannah Jinks in chat says, funny, but I've never met a good authoritarian. The only authoritarians I know, Hannah Jinks, the only ones are the globalist governments of Britain, America, and Australia, and those lefties who support them. They're the only authoritarians I know in the modern world, I've got to say.
I mean, Honecker was quite good. Or Franco. I mean, he definitely saved Spain.
Yeah, Mussolini was not a terrible man by any means.
Was it Salazar in Portugal? I mean, he was like he won election after election.
Yeah,
he was like
Salazar was based, and I tell you, when I was in the SADF, I knew guys who'd started fighting the commies in like Angola and Mozambique under Portugal.
Yeah.
And then one bloke I knew, then he moved to Rhodesia, And then after that collapsed, he then moved to South Africa. I mean, he was nutty as a fruitcake because he'd been fighting for so damn long. And being in his car, which was a souped-up VW Beetle, was more scary than being fired up by Swapo. But, you know, but he was a good man. And absolutely,
also,
he was a Salazar supporter in Portugal.
and also, and then this is be a controversial, but Saddam, at least, I mean, Saddam, under his rule, Christians were protected, and his foreign minister was a Christian. You
Look,
had, what was it, 2 million Christians in Iraq?
I am no expert on Saddam Hussein, but he was nowhere near as bad as the vile traitor Tony Blair and Bush pretended him to be. Put it that way.
No, I mean, you know, under his, I mean, you know, you had 2 million Christians, like largely most of them were Assyrian, you know, the ancient Assyrians descendants. They, you know, were not Arab. They are a different, they're different Semitic people altogether. You had a sizable population, and in the years since, many of them have been either forced to flee, been killed, displaced, and
Well, I think
was
Assad in Syria. I think Assad in Syria is a better example. You guys, like you and Mitch, will definitely remember the totally fake so-called chemical attack that Assad did on his own people, which was completely fake. It was just a Western made-up load of nonsense. Total lie. He never did it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I also remember.
I'm sorry.
Mitch, sorry,
go
mate,
ahead.
carry on.
I was going to say, what's tragic is that you get a lot of these Middle Eastern Christian communities where, you know, they've survived all manner of plagues, invasions. They've survived the Mongolian, they've survived the Ottomans, they've survived like all these caliphates. They've survived the fall of the Roman Empire as well as the Sassanid Empire, Persian empires, etc. They've survived the First World War and the Second World War, only to be destroyed by pretty much Islamic, like full-on hot-blooded Islamists in the wake of the American invasion. And Syria, it's not so bad because because Assad is very sort of a very secular leader. Like like that's why, for example, the opposition, like because at the height of the Syrian civil war, they tried to gay up all the whole thing as, oh well, these are all secular Democrats fighting against a dictator, when actually a lot of them were just like full-on ISIS tier.
Yeah, I was
get rid of Assad.
Mitch, forgive me for interrupting you, but it was a fact that the people who were fighting against Assad were often ISIS dudes funded by Britain and America.
Yeah, pretty much.
Who wanted to like capture young girls to turn into slaves, and would chop the heads off people and all this nonsense, or drown them, or burn them alive, and all this other stuff. And Western intelligence agencies like MI6 and the CIA were funding these people.
Yeah, pretty much. Because you get a lot of these like small minority groups, which like the Kurdish, the Yazidis, the Assyrians, all these small non-Arab ethnic groups or religious groups, which have long histories of just surviving all manner of persecution. They suffered greatly courtesy of the CIA and MI6 bigging up these ISIS tier individuals. So,
and you can also go on YouTube even and like watch guys going around in Syria today, and the bits that are run by Assad's forces and also the Russians have been helping him, I have to say, are pretty normal and look okay.
Yeah, Borden Bancroft visited and he said, yeah, like he generally found Syria safer than half of London and Birmingham.
Yeah, I saw that video. Yeah, it's worth checking it out, by the way. But yeah, absolutely. By the way, I just banned Hannah Jinks from the chat because I'm sorry, I'm not going to have leftists on this channel. I'm just not. Big problem.
But I'm Duke. You know, they may have protected their people from mass genocide, rape, murder, decapitations, but they were still authoritarians and they didn't adhere to liberal democracy, so they're still bad. You know, Hannah was right. Yeah, they're still bad.
Well, I
Still bad
don't
people.
adhere to
No,
liberal
you
democracy
must
myself.
accept. You must accept mass genocide, rape, decapitations, madness, mayhem. You know, Satan. You must accept Satan. Hail Satan!
Yeah.
The year is one.
Totally agree with you, mate. Totally agree with you. Bear in mind, we're on YouTube, so this is not a free speech platform by any means. But yeah, I totally agree, and I'm sure Mitch does too.
Yeah, I also wanted to I also just remembered so on my whole point of the Anglo-Saxons call themselves Anglo-Saxons. I mean, so the Celtic languages, they still call us Sasnag or Sassenach to this day because we still see the Saxons. The word English in Old English is Anglish because it comes from the Old Angle word, because that's the thing, the Saxons and the Angles were the two main tribes. The Jutes were also a thing, but they're more localized, whereas the Angles conquered everywhere from East Anglia to the up to sort of the border between the Scottish Lowlands and the Scottish Highlands, while the Saxons conquered the south, especially Wessex, Essex, Sussex, and so on.
Yep, totally true. Totally true. Did you have a first subject to bring up, AI, apart from what we've been talking about, which was kind of what we started on before you turned up? Did you have something you wanted to bring up?
I'm just trying to think. I'm not gonna. I mean, I'm not talking about bloody Philip Schofield, so we're gonna sort of ignore that for eternity. I mean, the only thing I was going to.
I was shocked, I tell you, that Philip Schofield turned out to be gay.
Yeah, I mean that's like like in my workplace and in just out in Normie'ville. That's like a very, especially amongst women, it's a very popular subject. I don't care.
I feel sorry for the young chap he's supposedly involved with, if he was as young as people are claiming. I feel sorry for him, I've got to say, but there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a bit of a weird situation, that. I mean, of course, being June, this is now International Pride Month. I guess I
sorry, that was a sound effect from someone.
International Pride Month, and yeah, so that's a thing. Interesting because, of course, someone like AA, his argument has been that the woke is being put away slowly.
Don't agree with that at all, but I see. I like some of AA's content. I think he's totally wrong about this, but that's just me, and I may be wrong. I don't think the woke's being put away at all.
I mean, on the local level, it actually hasn't. It's like it's gone the other direction. Like, I remember last year it wasn't as bad as this, and like now we've got gay flags everywhere. I mean, like the local council,
the cops,
every councillor
have them on their police cars.
The cops,
everywhere. The British Army and British Air Force and Royal Navy all support it. Surprisingly,
the local the local Anglican churches, which are stooped in heresy. I mean, it's all all over. And what makes it sad is, I think in some ways in the past there have been parts of England and Britain you could have escaped from seeing it and escaped being around it, but it has been so indoctrinated now that I actually don't think there's anywhere in the UK, unless you can find like an island in the Scottish Highlands, and I moved there or something.
You'll
I
be
don't
lucky.
think there's any way you get away with it.
Yeah, no, you'll be. Lucky.
I don't.
The real bad thing, AI, is that if you say a word against it, you're somehow a Nazi.
Oh yeah.
Say a single
and
word against this celebrating bum sex stuff, or like interfering with children's sexual development. Say a word against this, and somehow you're a Nazi.
yes, actually, there is one other thing I put it in the stream suggestion, and it was one of my mutuals uploaded screenshots from a, I think it was from Jonathan Bowden's
Oh yeah. I
speech.
saw that. It was excellent when he was talking to Gove.
Talking to Gove, that's correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
it was good. Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I mean that's quite, because the essence of that is, he's having this conversation with Gove about reducing immigration, and Gove is, well, I agree with you, but we can't say it. And Bowden is saying, yeah, well, why can't we say it? What's stopping you?
And
it
this
says,
is donkeys
well,
years ago, of course. This is donkeys years ago, of course, not now.
yeah, this. I think this is before Cameron. This is like right back in,
Would have been
I think
late
just after.
80s or something, yeah.
I think it was the late 90s. I think it might have been the late 90s.
All right, but it was
when
a
this
long
was
time ago.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Bowden was still in the Monday Club at that point, I think.
Yes.
It wasn't until after 97 the Monday Club well, people left the Monday. I think are they still going the Monday Club? I don't think they are now.
I'm not sure they are. I do have a stream by
Oh,
the way
no,
on my I do have a stream on my channel that people should go and check out with Eddie Butler, who was a good friend of Jonathan Bowden. And it's one of the most popular streams on my channel. Go and check it out. Sorry, I carry on.
Yeah, I remember the Monday Club was affiliated. It was a group within the Conservative Party, and then they were, I think it was Hague removed them from the Conservative Party, and that's why
What
a lot of people. Yeah, well, because also, as you know, with people like Bowden, some of them went over to the BNP. Some of them went to UKIP,
and can you blame them? Can you blame them?
Yeah, and then some of them, I think, like, there was one Conservative MP in there who just sort of gave up of politics altogether. Yeah, quite a lot of them, went over to the BNP. But yeah, in that conversation, that was quite an interesting one, because Bowden sort of got to the crux of someone like Gove, where they understand the argument, and they maybe in some messed up way they may sympathize with it, but at the same time they have no real interest, or they acknowledge, well, there's nothing we can do about it.
Imagine
Bowden,
being that much of a wet rag.
And Bowden pushes him and says, well, why is this the case? You need to explain it. You can't just say, oh, nothing can be done. And it's really interesting, because it just goes to you see the mind of Gove, because Gove goes on to say, oh, we're a multi, the modern Britain. He talks about modern Britain and the multinational identity, and Bowden rightfully goes on, well, no, we're a nation of conquerors. We're a nation that's been conquered, and conquerors. That we conquered, the British Empire,
quarter of the world.
That we are a nation of conquerors. We are the masters of the modern world, and we conquered. What was it? A third of the world.
It was a third of the world. I beg your pardon.
Something like that.
Mitch, what's your opinion on these subjects?
I don't really know Bowden as much. I mean, there's a speech of his I will go to every now and then about his vanguardism, which I find to be his best speech he ever did. Alternatively, there's also some of these speeches about specific figures, like they'll have one about Yukio Mishima or Gabbio D'Annunzio over in Italy, etc. As for the Monday Club, I mean, There was a history account on Twitter I saw the other day where apparently the Monday Club back in the 80s they were passing out posters all over the place saying "Hang Mandela" because back then technically he was a convicted terrorist at the time.
Yeah, so a self-admitted terrorist. He admitted he planted bombs.
Yeah, but also a lot of
let me clarify
Sorry,
that.
carry on.
He admitted that he organized the planting of bombs to kill civilians. He admitted it. He wasn't a nice man. Josephina in the chat. It's Eddie Butler, Eddy Butler. And go and look on my channel and you'll find me talking to him about Jonathan Bowden. And he was an actual good friend of Jonathan Bowden. It's one of the most popular streams I have on my channel. And more recently, Eddie Butler was involved in the For Britain movement, which sadly folded because the Irish woman who was running it just folded it for reasons best known to herself. But there we go.
What's the moral of that story?
Don't have women running your political things.
Don't have a woman and don't have a bloody Fenian running it. That's the story.
She wasn't. She wasn't a Fenian, to be fair. AI, but yeah, she was a woman for sure. And I also, I also think a lesbian. Apparently.
Oh, for God.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure she was born in Dublin, I believe, because I could tell. I mean, she had.
Yeah, no, she was Irish, but I don't
accent.
think she was a Fenian. Not all Irish people are Fenians, all right?
Yeah, but it's not just that. I mean, so she was lesbian, but she was also I'm pretty sure there was one stream she did where she was slagging off Laura Taylor, and you could tell visibly that she was drunk as well.
Oh, okay, fair enough. I mean, I'm not an enormous Laura Taylor fan, to be honest, but whatever. But yeah,
I'm sorry, but she's Irish, a woman, and a lesbian. I mean,
yeah, no, I totally agree with that. AI, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
oh my God,
you get an occasional woman. You get an occasional woman who can be okay, and I wouldn't go further than that. Like Maggie Thatcher, for example, and I would only go as far as okay. And really, that's only based on the fact that she had the balls to fight the Falklands War. But, in general terms, no, you don't want women running your political movements. They're not good at it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I do have to wonder what, and I don't want this to sound horrible. This is not directed at anyone, in chat or on stream with me, but I do have to wonder if there is a fetish element with certain people on the right where they love to be dominated by, the Lizzo, the liberal, the lesbian, globalist. I do have to wonder because I mean, AFD, they had a lesbian leader. For Britain, you're telling me the Irish lesbian. I mean, come on. I mean, this is there is a trend going on here, and I do have to wonder that. Is there people who've been so psyoped by propaganda that that even people on the right are subconsciously homosexuals? I don't know.
Well, I mean, look, AI, it is a fact that testosterone is at record low levels in the West now. That's just a fact.
Yeah,
it is
true.
Partly,
yeah.
It has to be said because of all the female contraceptive shit that's going into our sewage system.
And all the soy in food.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I mean, yeah, that's absolutely true. Mitch, your thoughts on this before we move on to a different subject?
On context, I mean, you can get I can't really figure out a way to articulate about the whole question of women in nationalism. Because I mean, on one hand, you'll get women like Lady of Shalott, who are like salt of the earth, but then
wife,
then I have a lot
mother,
of
homeschools, all good stuff.
but then you get a lot of women, so let's say of my age range, involved in nationalism, who generally tend to be the kind of individual you don't want involved in a political movement. Because I mean, for example, you know, some of them will cause drama because, I mean, I could go into it, but it takes too much time. So
Women
leave it
causing
there.
Wasn't
drama,
that
bitch. Who ever heard of a woman causing drama?
but wasn't that like one of the cause of the friction in the British in the was it the British Union fascists and the British fascists, like the because you had a lot of suffragettes who joined those movements, and you know, soon after joining those, things happened. That sort of was there's a sort of internal squabbles. It's just that I don't know if it's just women though. I do think, like, if you have someone who doesn't live the values, doesn't like live themselves the values that you want to return to, you want to bring back, you want to promote, then what's the point?
Yeah, I
You
look,
know,
I don't disagree with you, AI, but like the thing is that most women will, generally speaking, eventually adopt their blokes' political views, at least more or less. That's just what chicks do. It's just, you know, what millions of years of evolution make them do. So I don't trust women in leadership roles on the right. They shouldn't be doing that, and men shouldn't be letting them do that. Did any of you guys watch the interview between Andrew Tate and the BBC feminist bitch?
No, I don't really
I
watch
saw
Andrew Tate.
It's on the Discord. It's on the Discord, and like she's a typical BBC feminist, and like doesn't ask him reasonable. And listen, let me be clear: I'm no great fan of Andrew Tate at all, but it is pretty obvious to me that he is being targeted. Like he's being targeted for not doing anything really. No charges against him, but he was locked up for months and he's still under house arrest. No charges though, because he hasn't done anything illegal, pretty much. But there's this BBC woman who's obviously a full-on feminist, you know, no makeup, wearing a pair of trousers and a big pair of boots. Typical feminist woman who you like wouldn't look at as a man. And like she will not ask him questions, and she'll just keep repeating the same lies that she has written down on a little bit of paper, you know. And like I said, I'm not a big Andrew Tate fan at all, but he is obviously being targeted.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll try and articulate some thoughts I got with my question is that you get women in nationalism, let's say, I don't know, daughter of Albion or whoever. And the thing is, you know, because you do get some women on the distant right who will half the time spend their energy just like criticizing men who criticize a lot of women for, shall we say, being more prone to indoctrination of the enemy compared to blokes and whatnot. And because and then it leads to a situation where we're all just feeling like we're treading on eggshells because we don't know what to say about women, lest we end up feeling like we're going too far or not going far enough, or feeling like we're alienating women. It just becomes a situation where you just get conflicts because, I mean, you can't even decide because you get women in the movement who just feel offended all the time. That
well, look,
there's a lot of men who will talk about women.
I would say I think Sarah, daughter of Albion, is like one of the better women on the right. I also like people like Poe the Person. I think she's okay too, but she's also a wife and mother. And that should be the central role of women on the right, that they're supposed to be wives and mothers.
Yeah, but like the main women I'm talking about are like women who, let's say, they're not married yet. Let's say women between the ages of, I mean, the women I'm talking about are not like lady of short age. You're talking women from like 18 to 30, for argument's sake. Like women who have not got married yet, they've not had children yet, they're in the movement, and it's a situation where because they see a lot of rhetoric of our side, where it's like, oh yeah, we talk a lot about the women question, how women are more susceptible to indoctrination,
which they are.
Yeah, but then it becomes a situation where some of the women will just complain that, oh yeah, it's a lot of incels are whinging about women, blah blah blah, or oh yeah, this is just, oh well, these men don't talk about the men who also do their share of causing trouble for civilization. It just becomes a point where we're all just having to tread on eggshells, or we just feel like there's a great deal of uncertainty about what to say, lest we feel like we're not doing enough, or lest we feel like we're offending any females coming into the movement.
And that's very, very easy to do, of course. Like, you say the slightest word out of place and some woman will turn around and say, oh my God, because women always overreact to these things. Or most women.
I do think the thing is, for women to process the concept, conversation, or process any sort of information, it's usually done by consensus. So it's usually with others. It's like open dialogue, right? That's how processing information usually works for women. That's, I think, and you see it all the time. For men, that's sort of the way that information is processed is usually either deep internal thought, or in deep internal thought, or something over time. And so I do wonder if that old thing of can women actually think in abstract terms? And it does make me wonder, because I think in some ways that there is some sort of element of truth to that a lot of women find it difficult to think in those ways. That maybe there's like a biological component to that, and they operate better in group, like as Alice says, their group consensus.
Yeah, for sure. All right, look, we have a special. Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say that's why women, no matter what regime it was, we talked about like Roman society under its pagan rule or Christian rule. The reason why societies are why they continue is usually because whatever the ideology is, the women in that society uphold the dominant culture.
Yes,
that's always been the case.
Yes,
every society.
We're seeing that where they uphold all this bullshit about LGBTQ, etc. Yeah, 100%. I agree with you.
Yeah. Even in Austrian painters, Germany, the most zealot National Socialists were
100%
women.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, they follow the herd. Where the Overton window is, there you will find women.
Yeah,
100%. Look, before our last half an hour or so, I would like to make a special subject for this week, because someone on the Discord, IR Revels particularly, who's a young chap, wanted us to talk about the difficulty of getting onto the housing ladder in modern Britain and Australia and like most Western nations, and how that retards the formation of Anglo-Celtic families, etc. Because obviously, if you can't get a house, it's a bit difficult. You get married, you want to have kids, you kind of need a house, don't you? Yeah, I'd like to speak about that next. Mitch, what's your view on it? You're a youngish bloke. What's your view on this? Like, because mass immigration, and it is mainly mass immigration, is like making houses totally unaffordable for many real British people, and much the same thing is happening in Australia for much the same reason. So, what was your first thoughts on that one, Mitch?
Like when it comes to the housing market, I can get blackpilled when I look at it, because I mean, it is unlikely that anyone of my generation, beyond sort of the likes of Tom Harwood or whatever, will actually be able to own their own house. So it's
Tom
like we're just
Harwood's
going to
never
be.
getting married though, so.
I mean, Tom Harwood is let's say he's horizontally reclined towards not towards women, shall we say? I'll leave it there.
Yes.
So yeah, yeah. As I said, like outside of like, I mean, even then, I mean, I saw something where it said like with because there's like this kind of meme where the only Zoomers who are getting their own houses are the type of women who go on OnlyFans. But even then, it's on like a select few here and there who actually make a lot of money, because it's like the Pareto principle, I believe it's called, where it's always the top 20% who get like 80% of the wealth or whatever. And it's like that. I've read it something like that, and it's like, yeah. In the case of England, I mean, I saw something like Russian house prices, for example, have gone down by 33% in the past 10 years, because I don't really know, but like, whereas in England it's gone up by like talking like 68%, I believe, was an absolute minimum for like how housing prices rising over the past 10 years. So, and God knows how it's going to go up in the next 10 years. So, like, that's just pretty much my point of view. Is just like, as a 22-year-old, I can get pretty blackpilled about the housing market in terms of we're just all going to be condemned to having to rent forever, and or be subjected to like just mortgages being the only means of really holding on to a house. Because I mean, I suppose like for people going my career, because I mean I'm going into more of a trade, so I'm going to do better financially compared to what my original plan was when I was 18. So financially, I'll probably look better in the future. But aside from that, I'm still going to be in a position where it's not going to be like my grandparents who bought the house back in the 80s thanks to Maggie Thatcher. It's going to be a position where, yeah, I don't have that luxury.
Yeah, 100%, Mitch. Totally agree with that. AI, you're a fairly young bloke. What's your opinion on this? The extreme difficulty that people in Britain and in Australia and other Anglo-Celtic nations have on getting even onto the bottom rung of the owning a house ladder, and like how that makes it so much more difficult for you to get married and actually have a family.
Yeah, I mean, the decline in birth rates, which usually is a contributor to people in greater choice. It really isn't. It's down to the fact that you can't afford. I mean, I can't afford it. If I want to have a family now, I can't. I can't afford it. But 50 years ago, someone in my position quite easily could. You have in this country inheritance tax, which makes it incredibly difficult for when the next generation passes on and gives it to the younger generation. There's barely anything left, and so and then of course older people going into care, they would have to sell their homes to pay for their care.
Yep.
that's another thing that has happened in the UK.
Yep. Instead of being able to pass them on to their children, they have to sell them in order, like, to get looked after in their old age. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, in their old age. That's right. So, yeah, you've got entire, and then of course in the UK there's been huge properties being bought up by foreigners, foreign companies.
Who never live there, they just own them. Like loads of Saudi Arabians own places in London and all sorts of people. Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, Arabs, the odd one or two Russians. No, I don't know who.
But I mean,
look,
what I think you got to look at is like the average amount of a mortgage that you require, and compared to the average wage. And that has gone totally south for Brits and also for Aussies. Totally south. Like
but
30, 40
without
years
sounding,
ago, you needed like something like, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, AI, but I just want to get this across. 30 or 40 years ago, you only needed like, I don't know, 2-3 times your annual salary for your mortgage. And now it's like 5 times that.
Yeah. So I think I think what the problem is in Britain and Australia and other Western countries is that you have a culture and ideology of capitalism, where you have just the belief is there's endless growth, right? And you know,
but no real growth in the economy. Like Britain doesn't hardly make anything now.
No. Growth is usually determined by just importing as many people, and there's a quantity of like what is it, master scale, the
GDP, which is a crap way of
GDP,
crap way of measuring
it is.
But
René Gunon's Reign of Quantity or something is a good sort of book that will articulate that in greater detail of what I mean. But it's just you import enough people, you'll just have growth of the GDP, and that's why someone like Tom Harwood, he always posts pictures of some rural bit of England and say, oh look, here's empty land, we can build, and in his mind he would turn the whole of England, the whole of Great Britain into one giant cyberpunk
concrete jungle.
Blade Runner concrete jungle. That's ultimately what he would do. And the thing there is, he's not like just some silly dipshit. And there are many people who on the capitalist side, who are capitalists or free market conservatives, let's say, as they might refer to themselves, who agree with him on that assessment. And so I think when it comes to the housing stuff, everything has to be seen as competitive, and that's why you've had this problem. Why we've had this disaster in England, where you've had effectively the average English person, young English person, is going to be equivalent to some sort of medieval serf.
Or far worse, or far worse, absolutely. You'll own nothing, but somehow you'll be happy. Live in the pod, eat the bugs.
You'll be able to rent your cupboard, the sort of size room in this grand futuristic apartment block, and and the funny thing is, I know Blade Runner, but the thing is, I honestly think Tom Harwood, that I reckon he jacks off to Blade Runner because of like the architecture and the cityscape. I mean, I honestly believe that is like his ultimate dream.
God. Well, look, I'm no fan of Tom Harwood, but I'm not going to comment because this is YouTube. So, twinks, Mitch, what's your opinion on this? I mean, like I said, you and AI are like young dudes who hopefully will be looking to set up families at some stage. What's your thinking on this, Mitch?
Like, in context of a housing crisis, I mean, this is one thing that can really push me to just start think about emigrating. Is just the fact that I'm not going to be able to own my own house in the UK because it's practically impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas in Russia, for example, I mean, you've got the Oil Grey fella. You've got Oil Grey fella who, so he doesn't really speak Russian, but but after 5 years of living in Russia, he was able to buy his own house in St. Petersburg.
He's married to a Russian girl, isn't he?
Yeah.
And
he's got a child,
I think he started off as a British soldier, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Royal Marines, I believe.
So, actually, wow, even better. But yeah, he seems a nice dude to me. But yeah, I can perfectly understand that. I follow this channel on YouTube called Russian Homestead Girl, and it's not at all political. It's just this cute Aussie girl living in Russia. I think she even lives in Siberia, for God's sake. But like, yeah, these people can like live there quite easily, as far as I'm working out.
Yeah, east of the Ural Mountains, the Russian government will actually give you money and encourage you to settle. Well, they'll give you tax benefits and whatnot because east of the Ural Mountains it's too underpopulated when it comes to Russia. So the government will actually incentivize you to settle. So, for example, that Australian family, they live out in Altai Krai, which is not far from Mongolia, and it's actually a lot of that land is actually prime for agriculture. It's just not exploited enough because, as I said, it's underpopulated.
I was watching a latest video today, Mitch, and like they've just moved into this new house and they're planting fruit trees and stuff, and you can just see the soil is really good. You know, like where I live in Australia, like my soil is sand. I have a very nice lemon tree in my garden, but if I want to grow anything else, it's bloody hard work, frankly. But yeah.
Yeah, like because I know also another thing about Russia is also like that Australian family will also get incentivized more because they're farmers, and of course after 2014, you had a situation where Russia wasn't self-sufficient enough in terms of food supply, so they incentivized farmers to have more land, have better machinery, etc., etc. So if an Australian family wants to move to like Siberia to farm land, then the Russian government would just be kind to them. Would just go, yeah, here's some land, farm it, be very productive, and you will have no problem with us.
Yeah, Alex Goodall, 1872, is saying, wild the East, it seems. Yeah, it is kind of a bit like what happened in America in the 19th century, I think. In that Russia is trying to populate this enormous area, like in the East.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, to be fair, it was very much a wild East back when the Russians first conquered it, back in like the 1600s. And you generally had all these sort of Mongolian and Turkic groups that populated the area, being like the kind of Native Americans because they didn't have anything much beyond bows and arrows and such. But like, yeah, the thing is, like, yeah, I mean, I don't know, like, let's say for argument's sake, Russia were to go, okay, we see Westerners who are very angry with our own governments. They don't. And if they just feel like they want to move over to Russia, why not incentivize? I wonder how. Yeah, so for example, I saw this one guy, like this one Russian fellow, who said that Kaliningrad Oblast ought to be repopulated with Germans, provided they're loyal to Russia, and Kaliningrad gets renamed to Königsberg. So
look, Mitch, I'll tell you. Look, I'm an Englishman, obviously, and I was born in London, but I live in Australia these days. If I was a young Australian, the only place I would think about moving to would be either far north Queensland, the north of the Northern Territory, you know, up around Darwin, or the north of Western Australia. they're the only places I would move to, because like around Melbourne or Sydney, like I live about 70 k's outside Melbourne, and the housing here is just totally unaffordable for most people. Even 70 k's out of Melbourne, it's almost totally unaffordable. You've got to go to a rural area, and you obviously, you know, as a young man, you got to be able to earn a living, because you can't start a family unless you can do that.
You know, it's another thing about Australia, though, because it's a pretty big place. You have to live in the cities to actually like be able to get to your job. So, for example, like it's all right if you're like a farmer, but I don't know about tradesmen in Australia. Let's say you're a tradesman who works in Melbourne. You'd have to live in the city, pretty much, wouldn't you, to be able to access like your workplace? And
not necessarily. I mean, look, you can look at people like Chris Gard. Chris Gard lives in far north Queensland. I mean, yeah, he does live in one of the larger towns up there, but there's no real big cities up there, if you know what I mean.
Is in Queensland more of a it's kind of like similar, because I've heard there's a lot of coal mines or whatever. I can't remember, because I'm going off like what I heard.
Oh, there's loads of mines all over Australia for sure, yeah. But like Chris Gard is a tradesman, apart from his musicianship, of course. But he lives in one of the he lives in the biggest town, I think, or second biggest town in far north Queensland. But that is still not a big place by the standards of like Sydney, Melbourne, London, or Birmingham, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, because because I saw a map of Australia earlier, because it's like detailed like the population
but
density.
all of the middle of Australia, Mitch, is basically like desert or semi-desert, and unless you're doing something like you running a cattle station or a sheep station, that's about all you can do in those areas.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, the only significant settlement in that area is Alice Springs, isn't it?
Yeah,
which is like middle of
pretty
Australia.
Much. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, because I mean,
the middle of Australia, like I said, it's desert or semi-desert. 90% of the middle of Australia. It's only a bit on the it's the east coast and a bit of the west coast, which is like habitable, really.
Yeah, because I mean, I forgot the point. Because I saw like a map of a population density, and he pretty much outlined that you have the area in Perth being the only area in the west that is densely populated.
Yeah,
and then you've got like the sort of like then you've got this sort of like big cluster between like Melbourne to Sydney.
To Brisbane, pretty much. You could really go from like Adelaide to Melbourne to Sydney to Brisbane. All of that east coast bit is like quite habitable and quite good, but it's all enormously expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think the mass immigration in Australia is as bad as it is in terms of sheer quantity.
It nearly is, because it nearly is, Mitch. And the reason it nearly is that like we're starting from a much lower population than the UK is. So if you take like the new Labour government wants 500,000 a year, right? And that's half of what UK gets, but our population is less than half of UK's population, so it's just as bad.
Yeah, he's in like, because I mean Australia's population is something like a few years ago you reached a 25 million mark, where it was like 20 or 30 years ahead of the original date they had before mass immigration started. So I'm assuming like mass immigration is bad enough that it's actually hiking up a population to the point where housing markets, for example, can't deal with the influx.
No, they just can't. They just can't.
Native, and you get the native-born Australian. I mean, they actually use the title Anglo-Celtic over there, don't they? In Australia, Anglo-Celtic as a label to refer to the actual state-building element of a people, don't they? I believe.
Look, it's just, Mitch, there's an excellent stream on a channel called The Franklin. Now, The Franklin's a member of our Discord, and he's one of the best Australian YouTubers. Go and check out The Franklin. His last stream was just about this subject. It was about mass immigration and house prices in Australia, and how there is no match between this enormous mass immigration into Australia and Australia's ability to build houses in areas where, like, you can live. Well worth watching. It's a long stream, but it's well worth watching.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I've heard. Oh yeah, because because Triple Five says about how actually like you could do well in Australia if you did agriculture, which I'm pretty sure the same could go in America. But the problem is, ever since the 80s, especially, you just have people like the generation onwards who they prefer living in cities and working office jobs or whatever, as opposed to actual agriculture. So of course, a lot of these farmers are having to sell up, and agriculture as an industry is just dying out compared to others.
Look, I'm not going to say 555 is totally wrong, but you should also go and listen to somebody like Furious Pertinax, for example, who comes from an Australian agricultural family, and he will tell you the extreme difficulties of like succeeding in that these days. So yeah,
because I mean, I know like, I mean, this is the problem. I mean, I only really know Russia as a comparison, but like in Russia, for example, generally the government will just like be off your back in terms of. So if you live in a major city like Moscow, St. Petersburg, you have like, your main apartment, or you might have like a house in the city. But in the summertime, you have like this little sort of country house you have called a dacha, where you just have like a garden. Where you just grow crops in the summertime, and the government just lets you do it. Like they'll just leave you alone. So it's like, because in the summer you go out into the countryside where so the children go up the woods or whatever. Meanwhile, you just plant crops, so that by the time summer's ended, or by the time like it comes to winter, you're going back to your home in the city, and you've generally got some of your homegrown food, so you don't have to go to the supermarket all the damn time like we do in the UK.
Yeah, fair enough. That makes sense to me. AI, what's your thinking on this stuff?
I mean, yeah, I don't know, to be honest.
I mean, look, in UK, I've heard that they want to cover whole fields with solar panels, which, with the limited amount of land in UK, strikes me as absurd. At least, you know. I don't know. What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, I was very critical of Peter Hitchens when he was suggesting that, he said every young English person should leave England, and the thing though is, I don't believe that, because, well, it's my home. I'm not going to leave. They can leave. The enemies of this country can leave. I'm not leaving.
But they won't, AI. They won't.
Well, I know, and
they're all on welfare, mate.
Well, it's going to have to come to a point where there's going to be no more talk.
Yep.
There's going to be no more talk.
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that. But I also see the point of someone like Mitch, who says, "Look, I got no opportunities in my country, so maybe I should move." And that's not un-British.
Yeah, fair enough.
It is exactly what many adventurous young British people did in the 19th century. They moved to Canada, they moved to Australia, they moved to New Zealand, they moved to South Africa or Rhodesia. So it's not totally un-British.
No, I mean, the thing though is, what makes it difficult is, in this current time, we are living through, in the Spengerian sense, the decline, and the decline could. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think the decline is going to last several generations. I think our lives will be defined by the decline. Even the younger ones today, it's just going to be one endless decline for us. And yeah, I mean, Russia and China and places in the East are, resisting what is coming out the West. But at the same time, they're not England, and so it is a difficult trade-off. I think if I guess if you're in a position where you just can't live, you just can't exist, then I guess if you have the opportunity to go to somewhere in Russia that you think you'd feel better in, then I mean that's great, because
I hear a lot of people who I like on the right saying that because the right has no power whatsoever in the modern Western world, none, that what you got to do is try and look after things locally with your family and friends and neighbors and this kind of stuff. So to some degree, I can kind of see the idea that, look, I'm an English guy, let's say, and maybe I can take the love of my life and move to somewhere like Russia and bring up a good family. So I kind of see where they're coming from, if that makes any sense.
I mean, all I'd say is Russia and Putin. I know. Well, there are some aspects of Putin where he's a bit of a boomer, right?
Yeah, but I mean,
compared
to Sunak and Biden, he's very basic.
Yeah. I know, but I don't know. I'm not entirely. The Russian. I mean, you will find the problem is the worst case scenario is you go to Russia, you set up shop there, and then the West successfully overthrows Putin or something like that. That's like worst case scenario.
Don't think that's going to happen. Don't think that's going to happen. I've got to say.
Yeah, but that's worst case scenario. The thing though is that there is a situation in there where every nation falls to global gayness. I mean that is the that's where I'm at mentally. That I think can happen.
Sure, but I mean, Russia is a long way behind Britain, as is Hungary, for example.
Yeah.
Wiggles in the chat is saying, for some reason, if you go to Russia, you're going to marry a Muslim. Why? You're more likely to marry. Your white daughter is more liable to marry a Muslim in England than Russia. Russia, I don't think, has as high a proportion of Muslims as England does. And certainly, they don't have as much influence on the government. And also, a lot of Russian Muslims are not actually brown. But there we go.
Well, yeah. I wondered if that was a reference to like Duginism or something like that.
Maybe.
I mean, because the thing is, if you're Dugan, well, I mean, if you're for people who are white nationalists, a lot of them aren't keen on Dugan for obvious reasons. Yeah. So, it's a difficult one.
I don't know. Look, our expert on Russia, because he speaks Russian, is Mitch. Mitch, what's your opinion on these things?
I mean, if I were to move to Russia, I'd either choose Siberia or choose St. Petersburg, which St. Petersburg doesn't really have many Muslims there. It's mainly Moscow that will draw a lot of internal migration, shall we say, and it's a very multicultural city. But like outside of Moscow, I mean, the Muslims largely stick to their own republics. Like the Tatars stick to Tatarstan, the Chechens stick to Chechnya, Dagestanis to Dagestan. It's not really like it is in the West, where they'll just forcibly implant people all over the damn place.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
just a situation where, for example, as I said, St. Petersburg, it's generally a very European city, especially demographically. Moscow can be like quite multicultural. It's still majority Russian and still majority Orthodox, but it does have a very international character about it.
But if
But
you
outside
look
of
at
that-
if you look at videos like in Moscow or St. Petersburg, and I fairly frequently do, most of the people you see in those videos are white. Like the overwhelming
Yeah.
majority of people you see in Moscow and St. Petersburg are white people. Whereas if you look at a video in London or Birmingham, that is not the case at all.
Yeah, I know. Because you have the biggest minority group in Russia are what I call the Volga Tatars, but even men. The Volga Tatars, when you look at them, like the women could pass off as Sicilians or Greeks because they're swarthy enough, but also like, they don't particularly look non-white. They don't look like the Mongoloids that people think of when they think of Tatars.
Yep.
So it's like, even men, I mean, they're a Turkic group, but I mean, speak a Turkic language, they practice Islam. But when you actually look at them, genetically and phenotypically, they look like Europeans to us, just more of a swarthy kind.
Well, I mean, look, I'm sorry, but my own opinion is if you look at the average Turkish woman and the average Greek woman, there isn't that much difference between them.
It can depend. I mean, the Eastern Turkish, there's quite a bit of a difference because it's like
Kurdish,
yeah. I know, I mean, but like the West, like the Western half, the Western half of Turkey, pretty much they're genetically very similar to the Greeks and Bulgarians and so on.
Yep, and there's loads of quite cute Greek girls, for example. I'm quite fond of my dark-eyed Mediterranean beauties, but there we go.
The trouble is, I get very sad when I see like Western Turks who look white, because I know deep down their ancestors were Byzantine Romans, and
Probably,
and then it reminds me, Rome fell, and I get even more depressed, and it's like, it's just like endless black pills. So I can't look at anything like Turkish because it just makes me sad.
I don't know. I'll look at Spanish flamenco dancers, for example, and they don't strike me as all that different to Turkish belly dancers or whatever. Biarki in the chat says you can't just move there, and I think he means Russia. I do believe that who was that chap you were talking about, Mitch? The guy who was in the British forces, who lives near St. Petersburg.
Right.
Yeah, if you go and look at his channel, I'm pretty sure he's got a link to, if you want to move to Russia, like he's got a link that will give you some advice on that. Is that all right? I think it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, for example, if I wanted to, I perhaps could sign myself to a university course in Russia, get like a visa. But the problem is, you try and get a flight directly from the West to Russia, you'd have to do something like get a flight
go to Turkey or something. Yeah. Go to Turkey.
Yeah,
first.
and then take a flight to Russia. Otherwise, MI6 will just be like, "Why the hell are you going on a plane to Russia?"
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a Polish girl who I like, Polish woman, I should say, who I like, who is like not typical Polish, and is not very anti-Russian. And like she's been to Russia and out again recently. But yeah, you're right. You have to go via a route.
Yeah, so it's not impossible. Because I mean, wait, what happened to AI?
Don't know. Hopefully, he'll come back. Either that or MI5 got him. So hopefully, he'll come back. But yeah, like I said, there are a lot of people on the right who I respect who say you've got to do stuff locally these days. Yeah, and you've got to do stuff locally, look after your own family, go with family and friends and all the rest of it. So to me, I could perfectly understand someone in UK or Australia saying, yeah, all right, I'm going to ditch this and go somewhere where I can actually afford to buy a decent property and raise a good family. I mean, so I can see that for sure. Because there ain't any way we're going to be able to change things in England and Australia in the short term. Not going to happen. The only way that's going to change is when the whole housing bubble bursts and it all collapses, which it's going to, without a doubt. Is the only question is when. Is it going to happen in the next 5 years or the next 15 years? But at some stage during that time, the whole housing bubble in the UK and Australia and other Western nations is just going to burst. There's no doubt of it whatsoever.
Yeah, I think like discussions like this, because I wish I was like, because this is the problem with the fall of the Roman Empire is we don't really know how much of like how people would have dealt with the collapse. It'd be very interesting to look at how, for example, the Romano British really dealt with the collapse of Roman authority, and see like, because I mean, and see how that would play out today. But like that's the problem is.
Well, as we said right at the beginning of the show, Mitch, like loads of Romano British moved to Brittany in France, which was still Roman. And
yeah, but also
eventually the Romans abandoned that too. So, you know.
Yeah, but it's like you had a situation where so immediately after the fall, they tried to shore up as much of the old lifestyles as they could. So, for example, the Roman baths, they tried to shore up as much of that as they could and try and retain some of the luxuries they had. But like, so they tried their best to make things afloat, like keep things afloat. But like, I wonder like how long till just everything like infrastructurally collapsed. Where, for example, because I mean, you can imagine once all the luxuries from ancient Rome died off, you can imagine the Roman and British were just lost. Like they were just spiritually lost because they didn't know what path to take. So they were ripe for the taking by the Anglo-Saxons.
Yep. And as I was saying earlier, they'd lost their earlier warlikeness during the hundreds of years when the legions were there.
Yeah, and it's not just, I mean, by the time because you had Magnus Maximus, I believe his name was, who he took like all the legions based in Britain to fight for his claim to the Roman imperial throne, and he himself gets defeated in modern day Croatia, I think. But like the thing was, the manpower was never recovered. So by the time Vortigern has to deal with the Scotty and the Picts coming in from Ireland and Scotland raiding northern England, he has to call upon the likes of Hengist and Horsa to shore up Hadrian's Wall against said Celtic raiders.
Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely, that makes total sense to me. So yeah, look, we're in a bad situation in the UK and Australia and what have you. And like I said, the housing bubble is going to burst. The only question is when it does. And when it bursts, there's going to be huge numbers of people who will not be able to afford their mortgages. And all of a sudden, their houses are going to be worth far less than their mortgages are. This is just going to happen. The only question is when. In my opinion. What do you reckon, AI? Josephina Herringway is asking in the chat, name of YouTube channel with British expat. Well, I'm a British expat, but I don't know what channel you mean, Josephine. If you tell me what channel I was talking about, I'll tell you what it is.
I think
the Franklin, for example, he's a indigenous white Anglo-Celtic Australian. He's not an expat. although he lived overseas for quite a long time. 555 doesn't think it will happen in Australia. You're totally wrong, mate. It's going to happen. It's only just when. Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
sorry, the Russian expat. Mitch, what's the name of the Russian expat we were talking about? The guy who was in the British military.
Earl Grey.
Yeah, Earl Grey. Yeah. There you go. That's the one, Josephine. Sorry, AI, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this is also down to the demographic crisis in the West, the artificial GDP growth, creating industries where you have to import, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of people from all over the world. I mean, yeah, it's not good,
Tim of Arminius asked me a question which I do want to address because I actually saw a newspaper headline about this yesterday. Have I talked about the attacks on the SAS, the Special Air Service Regiment in Australia, and the Special Forces community in Australia? Any views on the Ben Robert Smith's situation as an ex-soldier? Yeah, they're hanging him out to dry. They're hanging this.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Yeah. They're saying he killed civilians, and there's no evidence he really did on purpose. I mean, I'm sorry, but if you're fighting in a war in Iraq or Afghanistan, there is always some possibility you're going to hit civilians when you're firing at the enemy, because the enemy don't wear uniforms. And this Ben Robert Smith dude, who was given a bravery medal by the Australian military, has just been hung out to die. He's been hung out by the Labour government in Australia, and the Liberal government obviously didn't do anything to quash this crap. And Biaki, yeah, I totally agree with what you say there, mate. When you say F the seas, yep, totally agree. He's been hung out to dry. He was sent there to fight for this globalist war, and they've hung him out to dry. I'm sorry, I carry on.
Yeah. No, I have actually followed this story. In this country, the BBC reported on him as one of the most decorated Australian soldiers, now disgraced and vilified by the Australian people. That's literally the words used by the Beeb.
Yeah, not by the good Australian people, just by the shitbags who run the country. Yeah.
And my theory behind this is that I believe that there is in Australia and Canada, New Zealand, and I believe that in particular Australia, this is part of the process of decoupling the Australian identity from the wider British identity, even though there's very little that remains. Because the the SAS and the military and the links and the ties that comes with, I believe that this is just a way of.
Well, I mean, this dude was like
a war on the Australian identity.
This dude would have been one of the heroes of the Anzacs, and the Anzacs are one of the central founding myths of Australia, and they're not totally a myth because they were really good, brave soldiers. But this dude was absolutely a good Anzac, and they've thrown him under the bus. And as Biaki says, this guy is a martyr, basically.
But you're going to see more of this, though, with the Anzac, with your Australian identity. You're going to see more of, because, of course, obviously in the background you got the moves for a referendum to become a republic, but what that forget about the constitutional aspect of it. The idea is just to remove Australia's ties with Britain and imperial and the British people and the ethnic identities and all that, and for it just to become another another America, let's say.
Well, look, I tell you what, I would like to do a stream on this subject. Probably not a long one, maybe just about an hour. And I'd like to get people like Don the Pleb, who's an American United States Marine Corps veteran who fought in Afghanistan. I'd like to get people like him on to talk about this, because like then you're getting people talking from knowing what they're talking about, if that makes any sense. But as far as I'm concerned, this poor dude is just being thrown under the bus by our political leadership, who absolutely wanted to go and fight wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. But no one does anything to them. I mean, if you Tony Blair, for example, who got over 700 British soldiers killed for absolutely sweet Fanny Adams, and thousands more maimed and wounded, if you're Tony Blair, you get a knighthood. You don't get thrown under the bus like this poor bloody Australian Special Forces soldier.
I mean, you remember shock and awe? You remember the shock and awe?
I remember that bullshit. Yeah,
and it was the way it was sold. It was sold that this was like precision bombings. I mean, the fact of the matter is, precision bombings aren't real anyway. But that being said, how many civilians were killed in that? Because there were a lot killed.
Very, very large numbers. But of course, none of those senior Air Force officers or the politicians who ordered it, none of those guys are going to face any consequences.
No, and they never will. That's why you shouldn't join. I mean, the British RAF, they just, it was leaked. Remember when they put that ban on white males? I mean,
useless white men. We don't need useless white men. I don't know how Britain would have gone on in the Battle of Britain without useless white men, but there we go.
It's a shame. I wish the useless white men in the Battle of Britain, if I get a time machine, I'm going to show those useless white men what modern Britain looks like. Maybe they'll...
they'd all stop fighting. They'd all stop fighting. Every single one of them.
Yeah, they'd all stop. Well, no, they'd carry on fighting. It's just they would join. Well, we all know who they join.
Yeah, so, I know what you're saying. Yeah. I know what you're saying. Yeah. Mitch, any comments on that? But
I don't really know much about Ben Roberts-Smith, but like that RAF tweet. I mean, I think AI pretty much said, and pretty much like both of you said what I was thinking anyway, so I can't think of anything to say.
All right. Anything you would like to plug, Mitch?
There's my Twitter account. That's the only thing I can really shill, to be honest.
All right. What's it called?
Anglo-Gopnik.
There you go. Mitch's Twitter account. Go and check it out. AI. Anything you would like to shill?
No, it's all over. It's all over. It's all finished. We've lost. No, I'm.
We haven't lost yet, mate. We're still fighting, and
No.
Britain never surrenders. So, we haven't lost yet, but yeah, it's not going well. I'll grant you. But is there anything you would like to? Is there anything you'd like to show?
I am going to do at some point this week. I'm going to have to make myself do it. I wanted to do a stream. I've been wanting to do a stream for a long time. It's just I haven't had time to really put the dedication in for the research for this. But looking at the story of Beren and Luthien from the Silmarillion, from Tolkien's work, the relationship between the two characters, the long-running theme of like mythology around love and relationships, and so that's what I'm going to be doing this coming week. I'm going to try and do it so it doesn't clash with other streams in the evenings, but yeah, that's my plan. I think it may be Thursday evening.
Well, AI, when you know it, like DM it to me on the Discord, and I'll stick it in the description. Yeah. We do have a super chat we need to address from EH for US $3. What's the panel's opinion on Porton Down experiments on servicemen and the soldier civilians exposed to Christmas Island, Australia, nuclear test, plus fluorescent particle trials over South England? Now, I will say before we get onto this that I actually did the Portland Down Battle Run in the British Army many moons ago, which you ended up wearing an NBC respirator and your fucking noddy suit, which were vile, by the way, an NBC suit over your uniform. Yeah, and you ended up wearing your respirator for 24 hours. It was vile, let me tell you. So that's my experience of Portland Down. Do you guys have anything to say about
Um,
No, I can't think of anything.
I mean,
that?
given the state of the military, the UK military, and how they openly admit they hate the native population, I'm not surprised they experiment and remember the bad guys, World War II. What they do to the population? Remember the Nuremberg trials?
Yep.
Thank God that never happened again afterwards.
Yeah. Look, like I said, I did the Portland Down Battle Run, so I've got some experience of Portland Down. I don't know what experiments they did on servicemen. They may well have done. Soldier civilians exposed to the Christmas Island, Australia nuclear tests. Don't know what that's about. Sounds a bit lefty to me, to be honest. And fluorescent particle trials. Don't even know what that is. So yeah, that would be my answer to.
The only thing I know is that the American was it like American servicemen in Vietnam were given LSD or something like that. Wasn't that a thing?
Yeah, I think they did try. Yeah, they did try that. They were hoping it would make a super soldier, and surprisingly, it didn't. But yeah,
I remember I remember reading a story that there were like there was a combat boat patrol, and they had like this crazy hallucination where they saw UFOs attacking them, and then they just started shooting randomly, and they ended up like shooting their own people and villagers and stuff. So yeah, I mean,
wouldn't work too well. Tomb of Arminius says 24 hours in a respirator. Yeah, trust me, mate. In the end, like most of us were like unscrewing the respirator so we could breathe a bit through the unscrewed bit. Because what they did, they used to go around with CS gas, and CS gas is very unpleasant. It's what they use to break up riots and stuff. But they were only around at some stage, and they were just using CS from like a container, and so the officer would go around, or NCO would go around doing that. So if he wasn't around, we used to unscrew the respirator a bit, and I even ended up in my bivvy doing smoking drills, i.e., lifting up my respirator and smoking because I'm a nicotine addict. But there we go. But yeah, it wasn't fun. The only good bit about Portland Down was they had all these hawker hunters who were dropping fake chemicals on us, and that was kind of cute, watching these hawker hunter jets from the 50s, which were cool. That was all right, but the rest of your question strikes me as a bit lefty, to be honest with you, mate. But anyway, there we go. Thank you very much to my guests, Mitch and AI. And I'm going to play us out with a tune from an excellent channel, which is, I'm trying to remember his name now. Hang on. Patriotic Archive, who picked the thumbnail for this video. And this is a tune, a Royal Navy tune. It's called Sea Harriers. And it's from the 1982 Falklands War, which was the last real British war, when the Argentinians foolishly invaded British territory and the Brits went down there and chucked them out in short order. So anyway, we'll play this next.
Yeah.
And there we go. That was Sea Harrier. Go and check out Patriotic Archive's excellent channel. And I would remind everyone, especially everyone British in the audience, that every single British air-to-air kill since at least 1948 has been by the Royal Navy Fleet Air Arm, not the RAF. Thank you once again to my guests, Mitch, and to AI. Go well, people, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the stream if you did.